Hey everyone, we are going to take a look at circumference of circles. Circumference is a fancy circle way of saying perimeter. So just like perimeter, it's the distance around the circle. So because circles don't have sides, it's just kind of a big loop. We call it circumference just to be special with a circle. There are two ways that we're going to be able to figure out circumference. The first is if we know what the radius is. The radius formula is c equals 2 pi r. And you remember that pi is that ratio between the circumference and diameter of circle. We did that experiment to figure out the relationship between those. Okay, so if you know the radius, you use this formula. If you know the diameter, you use this formula. The only difference between these two is the fact that the diameter is twice as big as the radius. So if you know the radius, you're just multiplying by 2, which basically gives you the diameter, and then you multiply that by pi. So that's the reason why this is 2 and an r in it versus just the d, is because if you know the radius, you know the diameter is twice as big, so you multiply by 2. All right. Let's take a look at some steps to solve circumference problems. So first thing is we're going to write down the information you know. In each of the problems, you're either going to know the circumference, the diameter, or the radius, and then you will use these formulas to help you figure out what you don't know. Write the formula that best fits your information. So depending on if you are given the radius, you use that one, or if you're given diameter, you're using that one. Or if you know the circumference and it's telling you to find either of these, you'll use a formula. If you're finding diameter, use this. If you're finding radius, use that. All right, plug in the values that you're given, show your work when solving, and then use a calculator to solve for your final answer. All right, so this thing pi, it's an irrational number, which means that it doesn't end and it doesn't repeat. And we can write it 3 ways. The first way on a calculator is with the pi button. This is the most accurate way to represent pi because you're using actual value of pi. It is not typically one that we use quite often in our math. What we will more likely use is we'll just round it to 3.14, even though that's not technically what pi is. That's just a way we round it to 2 decimal places. And the last one is as a fraction, we can use 22 over 7. For our purposes today in this lesson, we're going to use this middle one, 3.14, just to keep it nice, simple, easy, and rounded off. All right. Let's take a look at the first circle we have. So if I take a look, we are given the diameter because that goes all the way through. So it tells me that the diameter is 18 kilometers. And what we need to do is we need to solve for the circumference. So we're going to use the formula of c equals pi d. And the reason is because we know that the diameter equals 18 kilometers. All right, so c equals pi d. We're looking to find the circumference. So throughout the formula, we're going to plug in the values we're given. Instead of pi, we're going to do 3.14 times 18. Grab your calculator, try that out real quick. I'll pause for a second to let you plug that in. Once you plug that in, you find out that the circumference is 56 and 52 hundredths kilometers. Now remember, circumference is the fancy circle way of saying perimeter. So the measurement for perimeter is not squared or anything else. It's just whatever unit you're given straight up. Okay, so circumference is 56.52 kilometers, or 56 and 52 hundredths kilometers. All right, let's take a look at the next one. In this problem, take a look. That goes from the center all the way out to the edge, which means that we have the radius. So we are given the radius, and that's 12 inches. So the formula we're going to use is c equals 2 pi r because that's our formula that includes the radius. So we're going to use that one instead of pi d because if we figure out the diameter, we're still doing it times 2. So we're just going to use this one. And we're solving for the circumference. All right, plug in what we know. We know 2, 3.14 for pi, and we said our radius was 12. Take a second, go ahead, plug all that into a calculator, do 2 times 3.14 times 12, and see what you get. All right, hopefully you plugged that in, and you weren't just sitting there waiting for me to start writing this down. But you should have gotten the answer of 75.36 or 75 3600ths. Our unit is inches. Now, if you don't believe me on why these formulas work out, you also can do this. If the radius, and this is from our last lesson, if the radius is 12, that means the diameter has to be double that, which is 24 inches. So another way you could do this, if you turn it into the diameter, you could then use this formula, C equals pi d, and then it's 3.14 times the diameter of 24. When you plug that in and run that math, you still get that answer right there. Okay, and the reason is this move right here, it's 2 times 12, same thing as 24. All right, so one thing we want to talk about with each of these things is that we are given a value that is the diameter or the radius, and we are solving for the circumference. We are not always going to have a situation that allows us to solve for circumference. Sometimes we're going to be given the circumference and have to figure out some of the missing pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this one. It says to find the radius, then use the radius to find the diameter. Round your answer to the nearest tenth. And I'm going to underline tenth, that way we see tenth. All right. So it tells us here, information that we have, circumference is 110 centimeters. So step 1's done for us. C equals 110 centimeters, which means that to go all the way around the circle would be 110 centimeters. And it says that we are finding the radius. So I'm going to use C equals 2 pi r. And instead of solving for C, we're going to solve for the radius. So plug in what we know. Circumference is 110. And that equals 2 times 3.14 times radius. So what we have to do is show our work. I can multiply 2 and 3.14 together. I cannot multiply with r because we don't know what r is yet. But what I can do is I can multiply these two things together. It's a math term called combined like terms. So what we're doing is we're taking two things that are alike. These are both just numbers. And we are going to multiply them together. So when you multiply 2 times 3.14, you get 6.28. Haven't done anything with the r yet, so we're just going to leave it here. Drop down the 110. And we have now created for ourselves a one-step equation. 110 equals 6.28 r. And we want to solve for r. To do this, divide 6.28, divide by 6.28 on both sides. They cancel out over here, and you get 17.52 on the left side equals r. You may be asking yourself, okay, Mr. Teitsma, is really 17.5159, blah, blah, blah. I rounded to decimal places because when we're thinking about rounding it to the nearest tenth, we simply just need those two decimal places. So thinking about rounding this to rounding it to the nearest tenth, okay? It's going to be this 5 that either, based on the 2, turns into a 6 or stays a 5. Well, if you know your rounding, okay, it's just simply going to be 17.5. And that's centimeters. So our radius rounded off is 17.5 centimeters. Okay, and what that means for us is we then need to use that information to figure out what the diameter is going to be. So remember, the diameter is just simply double the radius. So to figure out diameter, I'm going to do that up here. Okay, the diameter is 17.5 times 2. Go ahead and multiply that. Write that answer in there into this blank. Give you a second to do that. Okay, and the reason that we're doing that is, remember, if you look at this one here, the radius only goes halfway across the circle. When it goes the rest of the way through, the other half, that's the diameter, so that's double. Okay, and when you multiply these together, you're going to end up with 35 centimeters. Okay, that one ended up working out that you didn't need to end up with a decimal after it. Just straight up 35 based on how we rounded here. All right. So, one thing I want to point out as a final thing for this lesson. Each of the answers that we have, that is not the exact answer. And the reason is we rounded from pi. Okay? Pi is that irrational number, doesn't repeat, doesn't end. We ended it by calling it 3.14. Okay? But it keeps going from there. But we decided that we were going to end it and just have it be cut off there. So we've actually rounded all of our answers. Okay, the actual circumference here is not that, but it's pretty close to it. Same thing here, same thing for both of those. They're not exactly that, but they're really, really close to it. It's a difference of like potentially hundredths or thousandths in the decimal digit places. Not super big things like this would really be like 19 centimeters. Okay, it's very small stuff on like the larger idea of everything. But just understand, these are rounded answers, perfectly acceptable for our needs, but they're not the exact measurement. All right, we will review this stuff in class together. We'll go over everything. We'll make sure we understand circumference, and then next up is looking into area. Have a great day.